channels, television, your home for the news, and of course, the nation's news leader. And we're here for you on the Kogi and Bayelsa election that we've been following the proceedings from those two states for you. We have our guest right in our Abuja studio, the CPS, the INEC chairman, Mr. Rotimi Oyekomi, the spokesperson of the Nigerian Police Force, DCP Frank Mba, and a lawyer. The other issues are, but let's talk about the conduct of the exercise. Mr. Oyekomi, from what we have seen so far, give us, I think it's a very good point to get a report from INEC, from your situation room. What are the reports that you have for Nigerians at this point?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Sheung. We planned adequately for the two elections. As you are aware, we put all measures in place to have a good election. We deployed materials in good time. We took care of the aspect of logistics. We signed MOUs with transporters, with boat owners, and our belief was that things were going to work well. And we also trained our staff, our ad hoc staff, on various aspects of the voting processes. We deployed the smart card reader that was compulsory and that will be used and compulsory for the election. We put the voting cubicles in place. And we also have our senior staff members, including national commissioners and recs, that were deployed for the conduct of this election to ensure that everything went well. The reports we got was that we planned to open at 8 o'clock in the morning, but unfortunately, we could not achieve a 100% opening of polling units at 8 o'clock. But by 10 o'clock, we had substantial number of polling units open. And we had good stories from many areas in both Kogi and Bayelsa State. In fact, we were surprised that in some areas the turnout was quite high, and we were quite happy. Things went well. We thought we were going to have a good ride, a smooth ride, until we started hearing from pockets of areas about this disruption and attempt to stop the process, which was unfortunate. The issue of security has been quite nice. Remember, we have this synergy with the security agencies, with the police as the lead agency, and we worked very hard. We conducted our risk assessment and shared the details with the security agencies. They also conducted their own risk assessments, and we harmonized. And it was based on these shared narratives that deployments were made. And I think that as far as we are concerned, the security agencies have done their best. But like I always say, like we always say at INEC, no matter how much we plan, peace comes from the hearts of men. It's not just about providing security and planning for the election. It's also about conduct and cooperation of the stakeholders, especially the political actors. And part of the planning was that for the first time in governorship elections, the Commission had 2 stakeholder meetings in both Kogi and Bayelsa. In fact, the chairman of INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, led National Commissioner and senior management team to Lokoja and Yenogwa, to meet with political stakeholders on 2 occasions. And in both states, they also signed a peace accord. And with that, we were rest assured that there will not be any form of violence in the 2 states. But unfortunately, some of the stories we had today made nonsense of that effort. And I'm talking to you with a lot of pain, because when you put a lot of effort into planning for elections, you invest heavily. And remember, this money belongs to all Nigeria. It is the country's money that we are spending for these elections. You make all the necessary plans, and then at the end of the day, some people just come and try to rubbish all the plans. I think it is unfortunate. It is not something that we should tolerate in this country. But At the moment, we don't have the full report yet. We are at the point of collation. Voting has ended in the 2 states. I think the collation process is ongoing, but we are receiving reports both from the observers and from our own field supervisors, and we are trying to assess them. But I'm sure that by tomorrow we'll have a clearer picture of what really transpired. But from the point of planning, we tried our best. From the point of deployment, we tried our best. From the point of those at the polling unit, based on the instructions we gave to our ad hoc staff, those instructions were followed, and there was quite a smooth ride in many instances, but unfortunately, we had bad experiences in a few other places.
Okay, Mr. Yekomi, I appreciate you said you tried your best, but you know, when you look at some areas, process didn't start till as late as 10 o'clock. You know, for Bayelsa, where they were struggling to get the boats and all that sorted, you saw it looked more like last-minute plans with little children trying to get others to use their boats. So 11:25 process hadn't kicked off. You know, whose fault is it when the electorate see that it starts as late as that, and then you say 2 p.m. everything cuts off? This is something that we experienced in April, and we were hoping that November we won't be experiencing this anymore. In those stakeholder meetings that you're having, what is discussed about doing things differently, you know, so that we don't continue to talk about this come 2023? That's on one hand. And on the second hand, Kayla was talking about the fact that it's still going on. And if you can just give us an update from what you're hearing from your people.
Thank you very much. Those stakeholder meetings are extremely important because we can't take actions in isolation. All our policies are determined with input from all the stakeholders, especially the political parties. And when we get there, we discuss frankly about all issues. We put all cards on the table. For instance, before 2019, when we were going to talk about how we would design the ballot papers and the ballot boxes, we involved all stakeholders, and suggestions were made. When the issue of vote buying came up, and we decided to take steps to make sure that those things don't happen in our polling units anymore, we involved the stakeholders. And that's why we have these meetings with them. So those meetings are intended to address threats and to look at opportunities and how to do things in a better way. And we agree. We disagree sometimes to agree. And that's how we move forward. And of course, every meeting is an opportunity to assess what has just happened and then provide the way forward. So that's about the stakeholder meetings. But in terms of logistics, you know, we don't have, for instance, enough vehicles to transport our materials to all the polling units. We depend on private operators to do that. So what we did this time around is that we signed MOUs with individual transporters. The last time, I think we tried to reach an agreement with the transport unions, and there were hitches. So this time we said, fine, let's talk to identify reliable individual owners from the unions and then sign individual MOUs with them. So in the MOUs, we tell them how much we're going to pay and what they expected to do. And it was based on this MOU that we roll out our plans. But on the day of election, that's today, we had some issues with some of these transporters and boat owners. For instance, like the wreck in Bayelsa said, when somebody is expected to provide his boat by 6 a.m., he doesn't come until 8 or 9 a.m. On the day of election, it becomes a problem. And when you don't have immediate alternative, that if you don't have your own boat that you can put there, it becomes an issue. But we'll always find means of getting around all these challenges because we cannot continue, you know, to condone indiscipline in this manner. And based on every election had its own peculiarities, and moving forward, we are going to take some lessons away from this one and then improve. It's like with every election, there's something new to tackle, there's something new to look at. Voting has ended in the 2 states. The collation has started. It is true that voting is supposed to take place between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., but not in all instances. And what do I mean by that? At 2 p.m., the last person on the queue, you draw a line at the back of that person, that is, you close the bar. But that person has to vote even if it is beyond 2 p.m. So that's the principle we follow. So it's not strictly 2 p.m. when you still have the last person that got to the polling unit before 2 p.m. on the queue.
Let's bring in Mr. Emmanuel Ayegmunam, and perhaps after he lands on his response on this question, maybe Mr. Oyekomi can put in a word or two. We're getting some preliminary reports from civil society, especially those that deployed the PVT, the live updates on what is happening on the field. One of the recommendations made was they blamed the late arrival of materials or transportation to the fact that security operatives were not early enough to escort materials and the officials to the polling unit. So the implication of that was that they could not deploy early enough, so the exercise started late. So they advised that the voting should be extended in most of those areas. Now, in areas where we have disruption of the exercise and brigandage, they're asking that INEC should cancel the exercise in those areas. This has several implications. Mr. Ayegmunam, from your experience of legal implications on election, what do you see already happening?
Well, thank you so much. The scenario is really disturbing in the sense that every election in Nigeria has now been an entirely new learning process. Initially, we were in the trouble of coming to register by 12, you go back home. Then the issue of card reader came in. Every other process has been subjected to tests. And increasingly, because of the political culture, let me say one thing here. Election doesn't really create democracy, but it is a test of democracy. And politicians are the same all over the world. They promise to build bridges even when there are no rivers. So these MOUs and the rest of them will always come in. If you watch the scenario, once the incumbents or the government officials come to vote, there will be peace. There will be no disruption. Then they will go home. Later on, you will see these massive disturbances. But all I have to say is this. Administratively, the country is in a problem. It is not only with the election. Every other process, just think of the issue of admission into higher institutions, or even those who have graduated going on a youth service, you will see a lot of disruptions, administrative disruption, or what I call administrative paralysis, more or less. So if we take it on this way, having talked about this election, two issues are involved. If there are disturbances that have now more or less turned the election exercise into something else, there are no reports if they have carted away the electoral materials. You will call for a fresh election. Then when do you do that? And will the voters come out then? This is a problem of its own, depending on what INEC will do at the end of the day. Then secondly, the issues now are on so many issues, security, the rest of them, then logistics. I would have expected INEC within these geopolitical zones to have on their own, they were having only 2 elections among 36 states and 1 federal capital territory, to move some of their own cars, utility cars or lorries, into these areas and then complement. Maybe we should now go to a particular transport section. But like I told you, so far as the mindset of the actors on ground is defective, then we must have this problem. And that in the 21st century, we are still basing on a policing through arms, physical arms on the road. If we are talking of intelligence, to be fair and honest with you, a very intelligent setting would have been able to capture these areas, even beyond the police. The governor of Oyo State, Makinde, by news report, was attacked when he came in there. And to take a look to last week, the governor of Obaseki and the Oba of Lagos were attacked. So what I'm saying is that the state itself is losing its soul and responsibility. The state owns legal monopoly of violence. Nigerian state is stretched by all we are seeing now, and the election is a reflection of that. So all we are saying at the moment is that we should take a sober reflection and see where we are. Kidnapping and the rest of them are all incidents pointing to what the state now relying or subjecting itself, playing a second role to lawlessness or brigandage, which you cannot even account for. We have lost money, we have lost life, we have lost time. And if we are going back again, we will still lose public funds in doing this. And we are not the only, we are not expecting an ideal election process. The United States of America, which is the leading democracy, we have seen what is going on there out of their last election. But all the same, after 20 years of this investment, we are supposed to see at least a convincing setting that we have had 2 decades of unbroken democracy. But the level of violence and litany of deficiencies is increasing more or less. So all we are saying is that let's take these, bring these culprits, if they have been arrested, let them be subjected to severe punishment or stroke of the law. And we are happy that there was no rain today. So all we are still talking is that these are critical issues that calls for what? Collective responsibility of each and every one of us. I will not isolate the police. They may have done their best. Then what of the other security agencies? We have state security, DSS, and the rest of them. So in a collective intelligence setting, I keep saying it, in the 21st century, if we are relying on this level of policing, then we are not serious. And with our population going to the level it is, and where you must also take the social impact for people who have not been paid. God appears to the hungry in the form of bread, that we are buying votes at 500 naira or 1,000. Talks a lot about what we are and the level of politics we are into. So these are the collective issues each and every one of us must look at. They were old salaries and the rest of them. The political parties have no program. Did we see engagement of debate on policy or the rest over what we are doing? We have jumped into election, and after 4 years, we will come back again. So these are the issues, critical issues that now goes on the viability of what we call functional sovereignty and operational governance is where we are at the moment, and this is what is lacking in Nigeria. And we must collectively come together to address these issues. 40-something political parties on the ballot box, then 23 for the other. And we have not seen anything calling for what? Robust engagement. When they come with gun, who will say? And is there any insurance covering even the policemen or youth corpers who are ad hoc staff? And some of them may not even have anything to eat. For how many hours? So a lot of issues are involved. And the universities have not been able, or research institutions, to come into this issue. After every election, let us follow this and see a conclusion to it. Now we will all go back home. After 4 years, we'll come back again and start on the same level of noise-making and calling of names. It has gone beyond that. Let's take a holistic and proactive action to this. That is my submission.
Okay, Mr. Yokomi, I will come back to you, but I want to ask Mr. Anyebunam to respond to something that the chairman for the Center for Democracy and Development said earlier on our program today when she was talking to our correspondent. She says, from what she can see on the ground, looking at the process today, it has lowered the bar in terms of not just the conduct of our elections, but our electoral process itself. Do you agree with her? Do you think that we're not making any progress? Is the bar being lowered?
Yes, I'm really in sync with her, in the sense that we are talking of 2 state elections out of 36 states. And then after 20-something years, since 1998, more or less, with the local government election that brought us into this Third Republic, that we are still on this consistent or prevalent biases, more or less. I believe that we have not made the basic advancement. Like I told you, where are the policy issues and engagement? 80% or 90% of political parties are handbag or more or less Indomie political parties that are not in existence. So these are the issues, and there are no policies or manifestos. Like I said, if there are debates and robust engagement, most of these issues would have been settled. You don't form political parties in your house. There are suitcase political parties who have no program. Then on the other issue, electoral education, socialization, and the rest of them, proaction and participation, which will bring down the desire, the accountability and responsibility, are not on ground. I said functional sovereignty the state will assume itself as the what? As the owner of the territory that has legal monopoly of violence and not thugs. And once thugs meet the force of the state, they will run away. But here now we are seeing them having a field day. Secondly, I talked about what? Functional governance. All this brings down to the conducive setting that makes democracy a worthwhile venture on which will be the fulcrum where you will lay your electoral process and electoral system. So I am in sync with what CDC have said. This is a monumental deficiency in our electoral system, and we have to appreciate it as that and then work towards it.
Mr. Oyekomi, let's bring you into this. Not quite a good one. If I remember vividly, the Bayelsa and Kogi election 4 years ago gave INEC a bad name. In fact, INEC at the time was tagged inconclusive INEC because there were several inconclusive elections. In Bayelsa, it was on the third try before the elections could be concluded. In Kogi State, the elections also could not be concluded at the fourth try. This time around, some of the tendencies which led to that scenario 4 years ago is playing out, where we have disruption of the process, brigandage, and some of these things that are happening. If Idayat Hassan of the CDD is saying that this election and what has played out has shown that there is a decline in our growth or progress in our electoral process or democratic growth as a country, what does this mean for INEC? Is Bayelsa of today and Kogi of today's election a true test of what INEC has done or the progress INEC has made? Is it a disappointment for you?
Thank you very much. You know, I listened very well to Idayat when she was speaking. And it's quite interesting that civil society organizations now are calling on INEC to cancel the election in certain areas in Kogi State because of what they witnessed. And this brings me back to the issue of inconclusive election that you just talked about. You know, an election is a legal process, and there is a threshold for declaring results, for making a return. And all these things are there in the law, in the Constitution and the Electoral Act as amended. Now, when you allow INEC to do its duty, you don't interfere. You allow us to deploy. We roll out all our plans, all our activities. Voting takes place smoothly. Collation takes place smoothly. There is no violence. We'll make a declaration. We'll make a return. And remember, between 2015 and before this election, we conducted 8 governorship elections, starting with Kogi and Bayelsa. But in the governorship election where there was no interference, we had Anambra, we had Ondo, we had Ekiti. You know, we made declarations. And it shows that INEC is capable. You know, when we want to conduct elections, people are fond of saying it's a test, a litmus test. But you see, this is something we have been doing.
Sorry,
we
Mr.
plan for
Oyekomi,
elections.
I will allow you
at INEC,
to
it is...
I'm sorry, I have to cut in at this moment. Biggest apologies. I'll allow you to conclude your thought on the other side of the break. We just take a short one.
Before we go, there seems to be some news just coming in. We'll give you details of that, but let's give you a taste of what INEC is saying. INEC is saying that they will continue with collation of result, and they are monitoring the process. Reports from accredited observers and officials in the field indicate that most voters were willing to vote, had the opportunity to do so. But INEC, from a statement signed by Mr. Festus Okoye, the National Commissioner of INEC, just coming to us on China's television here, indicates that the commission says they're calling on the general public to remain calm while assuring voters in the 2 states of the resolve of the commission to ensure that the elections are concluded fairly and credibly. We'll go run for that break, and when we come back...
But I think when we come back, we'll also let Mr. Oyekomi have a breather, look at that statement and respond as well to it. Just give us a moment, we'll be back. All right, welcome back, everyone. It's our continuing coverage of the Kogi and Bayelsa elections. We've been at it for over 48 hours. We have some guests in the studio in Abuja, including DCP Frank Mba, Mr. Rotimi Oyekomi, that's the Chief Press Secretary to the INEC Chairman, and, of course, legal practitioner and Director, African Center for Parliamentary and Constitutional Studies, Mr. Emmanuel Anyebunam. Now, before we go back to our conversation, on the other side of the break, we were reading out a particular press statement from the INEC National Commissioner, that's Mr. Festus Okoye. And I do know that DCP Frank Mba needs to run off, but I'd just like him to respond briefly to what I have here. And part of the statement reads that the process in several places was affected by thuggery and violence, which the Commission unequivocally condemns. They are still receiving, collating, and evaluating these reports as they move into the critical phase of result collation. This is coming directly from INEC, acknowledging that there was thuggery in several places. So, DSP Mba, just talk about that briefly before you run off your parting words as you leave.
As a matter of fact, I have not in any way denied the fact that there were thuggery. I've also not in any way tried to deny the fact that there were violence recorded in the course of this election. I've also admitted the fact that indeed we have some of the suspects in our custody, and for us to have recovered arms and ammunition, that tells you that indeed there were incidents of violence, and these are things that we also condemn in every sense of the word, and we will continue to work with all stakeholders to ensure that we continuously come up with creative ways to improve our electoral system. But while I was saying this, permit me to quickly respond to an issue that came up when Idayat was speaking. And even before coming into this studio, I've also heard some insinuations from other persons to the fact that some of this violence were actually perpetrated by persons believed to be security agents. The truth is, if you follow the trajectory of elections in Nigeria and you've monitored or you've observed the political culture, or rather subculture, particularly around election period, or you've also tried to watch, even if it is casually or monitor casually, the crime trend and patterns around electioneering period, either before, during, and after, you will know that in our polity in Nigeria, issues of fake security agents are not new. We've had incidents of persons who were arrested in previous elections, impersonating members of the Nigerian Armed Forces, impersonating members of the Nigeria Police Force, impersonating other service personnel. And so it will therefore be presumptuous for anyone to just make statements probably intending to allude to the fact that because someone was seen in wearing a particular uniform, he is indeed from that service. Until these incidents are properly investigated, it will be too early for anybody to rush to the belief, or rather to the conclusion, that indeed anybody who was seen wearing a particular uniform actually is of that particular service. I can't rule out the fact that there could have been impersonators, because we have had them in the past, we've arrested them in the past, we've prosecuted them in the past, but I'm just trying to say we should approach this with caution. We are investigating all these reports, we are following up on them, and we'll keep Nigerians posted. Our commitment to ensuring the integrity of our electoral processes remain unshaken. The Inspector General of Police, in the run-up to this election, did say very clearly that his men will be very professional, that will be politically neutral, and we will provide a level playing field for all political actors. We remain committed to that vision, to that goal, and we continue to work in that line.
That's DCP Frank Mba, the spokesperson of the Nigerian Police Force. I wish we had more time to speak with you, because in my interaction with police officers on election coverage has always been complaints of welfare, and whether or not they are always abandoned on the field, and where they sleep, and all what a view on election. But I'm not sure we have time to do that. We'll allow you to run off. At some point, we'll still get you back, because we're still monitoring some of the incident. Okay, you wanted to make a point on the issue of the welfare quickly.
I think, yes, I think I need to respond to that, because that's something touching fundamentally on the welfare and well-being of our people, our police officers, including myself. Talking to you, I've been on duty since about 4 a.m. today, so I'm also a police officer, and I'm also on the field. So I want to say this, the Inspector General of Police, IGP Mohammed Abubakar Demu, is the father. He's more or less stands in local parentage to all police officers, irrespective of their rank. So he treats them like his children, and he's passionate about their well-being. In this election, for the first time, police officers are not just being paid 2-3 days allowances that it used to be in the past. They're actually being paid for more than that. They're actually being paid for about 8 days allowances computed together. And these allowances are not being paid across the table like they used to happen 20 years ago. And so the issue of the welfare of our persons, of our officers and men, is topmost priority to the Inspector General of Police, and we believe that there won't be any room or any ground for people to complain this time around.
That is actually heartwarming, and a lot of the times the issue is not always whether or not these monies have been disbursed, is whether or not it's gotten to some of these police officers, and whether or not at some point they've gotten it when they needed it. The monies maybe are, but whether or not they got it when they needed it. Because you see some of them, painfully, they're sleeping in the vehicles, using wrappers out there in the cold and all of that.
And don't also forget the allegations that they also leave. You know, they sometimes do not escort the boxes because it's a very long day and they're tired and all that.
It's an all-day shift for them on election day.
Yeah.
It's not only for election day. They are there before and after. They are perhaps one of the officials, some of the officials, that their work is not over. Even when people are sleeping in their homes and officials of INEC are in their homes, they are still at work.
But we must also...
Absolutely. We need to allow him to go.
Yes.
DCP Frank Mba, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. Let's go to Mr. Rotimi Oyekomi, get to talk to us on what the implication of the statement. It does look like a reassuring statement to the public from INEC saying, whatever has happened, we're going ahead. Is that what it means?
Yes, Sheung, thank you very much. That's what it means. It's just a situation report, and that we have received initial reports from the field, and we try to give an assessment of what happened throughout the day and what we observed. And we also confirmed the fact that while we deployed in good time both personnel and materials, while we tried to open up the polling units in good time, unfortunately, we also had reports that there were disruptions in several areas. And we also said that we are still studying the reports, and that at the collation center, our staff are there and are ready to start collating the results. Like I said earlier, there's a threshold for making a declaration and making a return in every election. Once the threshold is met, INEC will declare results. I don't know to what extent the disruptions will affect the overall exercise. That remains to be seen. But as we are continuing with the process, and hopefully we'll be able to conclude tomorrow.
Okay. Let me, sorry, apologies. I want to quickly do a follow-up to what Mr. Rotimi Oyekomi just said. Because we got this information also from INEC on China's television, a warning a day before the election that wherever there is a bad behavior, a disruption of the exercise, Mr. Oluwole Osazuzi was telling us that INEC will not entertain it. And INEC will cancel those elections in those areas. Is INEC standing on that statement? Is that statement still intact for INEC as a policy?
Thank you very much. You know, we talked briefly about inconclusive elections when before you went on break, and I was trying to tell you that it's quite interesting that some civil society organizations are now asking INEC to cancel election in certain areas where the process was disrupted. And this is precisely what leads to inconclusive election, because when we cannot make a declaration based on what is contained in the law, when you disrupt elections or you refuse, for instance, to use the smart card reader, if a polling unit, if all the voters, it rarely happens, but if they decide they are not going to use the smart card reader, we score them 0. And all those that have gone to a polling unit to take our ballot box with the vote and disappear with it, they are wasting their time. And if you check the history of the commission, all those that engage in that, in all the areas where those elections were disrupted in that manner, we've always gone back to organize the election and then make a declaration. But the downside of this, Sheon, is that it is going to cost us more money to conduct what could have been done the first time. And this is exactly what we need to have a conversation about, that we cannot continue in that manner.
Sorry, Mr. Yewood, yes, Mr. Oyekomi, let me ask you to look ahead. Yes, you've talked about the way the process is going and your stakeholders meetings and all that, but I want you to cast your mind forward now that the process is over and we're looking to collation and we're looking to what can we do now the polls are closed. There are some who say no matter what happens, our elections always end up in court. Parties never agree with the results in spite of signing peace accords and, signing that they will agree. And now we hear there are allegations that INEC plays a big role in this matter as well. When you look at the way the election played out today, there are so many loopholes, or are there loopholes for people to say, join INEC in a suit, etc. I think that's my question to you. Is INEC putting itself in a position where it is actually part of this whole reason why our elections end up in court?
Thank you very much. INEC doesn't intentionally go to make an election inconclusive or do anything that will affect the integrity of the election. It's a very serious matter for us. Every election is important, and we plan meticulously for these elections. And these are legal processes. Every action we take is guided by the extant laws. We don't go outside the extant laws. That's why when we are joined in suits, we are ready to defend ourselves by providing what the law says. Now, the issue of the judiciary making a pronouncement of election boils down to one thing: lack of trust. And it is not just about INEC. It is not just about elections. I think there is a fundamental problem in this country where people simply don't trust what you call government institutions or government business. There is always suspicion that there is some hanky-panky going on somewhere. But with INEC, honestly, this commission cannot be more open and transparent than it is now. And everybody is acknowledging that. There is nothing that we do that is not subjected to scrutiny by the stakeholders. And in fact, the focus of the media on us, the scrutiny is so intense that now we are on our toes at all times to make sure we do the right thing. We only wish that the same scrutiny that the media embarks on when it comes to INEC, they also put the same searchlight on political actors and political parties so that they can also adjust, So I think that, if you make a declaration, this issue with political parties and politicians that they don't ever lose election is a problem. But there are exceptional cases. If you check Ondo governorship elections, recall that the candidates were actually senior advocates of Nigeria, but they accepted the result. They didn't go to court and the issues were resolved. And that was really, really very good. If you look at the 2015 general elections, the incumbent at that time, President Goodluck Jonathan, considered defeat even before the final results were made. And that's the sort of thing that we really want. And I think that for every election that we conduct, INEC is not a political party. We are not interested in who wins any election. We are only interested in providing a level playing field, and we'll continue to do our best in that regard.
All right, Mr. Oyekome, we'll talk a bit more, but I'm glad you talked about, the fact that we haven't looked at the role of those political parties. We are going to beam our searchlights. I think Mr. Aye would have called some of them Indomie political parties. That's a new one.
Whatever that means.
That's a new one for me on the show. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, with the time we've got left, hopefully, we'll beam our searchlight on the political parties themselves. How have they conducted themselves today and, throughout this whole electoral process? Stay with us.
Right at the home stretch of our continued coverage tonight of the Kogi and Bayelsa election. My colleague here, Ijoma Yato. You see the best of Ijoma when you see some kind of political gymnastics and some kind of drama playing out. And mischief on the journalism job just
talking.
gets to his peak.
Look who's talking.
Gets to his peak, especially when she's in her usual fantastic red and black. Always an interesting moment with Ijoma. Some of the things that when she's on her best and when we're on break, you need to see what Ijoma is like. Well, that's on a lighter note.
I'll get you back 1-0, no problem.
Let's go back to our Abuja studio and round up now with our guests. We'll go to Mr. Anyebunam because what you said about Indomie politician got me cracking. And Ijoma has not stopped talking about we've tried to find in the dictionary, we cannot find it, what it means with Indomie politician. What do you mean if you can, Indomie political parties, and if you can also link it with the conduct of politicians in this election? Are you impressed?
Well, simply what the popular instant noodle in Nigeria is known as Indomie, and you know that you don't need any skill to fix that. So it's the quick fix. You see these political parties, they are not in existence. You hear them, their offices, most of them, 80% of them are in Banners Plaza. You don't see them until election day. You see them in ballot boxes and they go home. Actually, it brings to bear in 1975 when then Yara Mohammed wanted to inaugurate the Constitution Drafting Committee. He warned that the first political parties, first Republic political parties we had were armed gangs fighting political wars. Therefore, that they should ensure in the Second Republic that we should not have such. Actually, the Second Republic political parties replicated the First Republic parties in a lot of ways. As at the time they were going in 1983, Ondo State, what happened in Ondo State then and Oyo State in Second Republic election, 1983 election, is better forgotten than remembered. We now moved over to the two political party arrangement of SDP and NRC. We were not able to solve that problem. The next phase was what brought us to this republic, the Third Republic. The INEC then, when coming into power, believed that you must have the basic spread, but to avoid two mechanical or structural parties, that the third party, which was then AD, or Alliance for Democracy, that could not have the coverage should be registered. But after the processes, the case of INEC and MOSA, because INEC caused a problem by registering only 5 political parties, opened the political space to a lot of issues, and which has brought us to this Indomie regime. Meanwhile, so that's the issue at the moment, that when you are not equipped, if you go to our political parties, they have no program, they have not called for any workshop or anything on policy. budget and the rest of them.
Yes,
they have the rest of
that's
ideas.
that word again,
All
the
they have
regime.
to do
I'm so
is to
sorry,
work.
Mr. Nyebudam, to have to do this, but you know, we could talk about this all day, all week.
Absolutely.
And it's not over. I'm going to have to thank you, Mr. Nyebudam, as well as the Chief Press Secretary, the INEC Chairman, Mr. Rotimi Oyekome, for joining us as we look at this live coverage. And it's not over yet, Sheil.
It's not
Yeah?
over. In fact, this is perhaps the second phase of an election day
That's right.
process. So we're still looking and following through on China's television. Well, if you need to know, you've got to be here. China's television, as you covered, we're combing all these two states for you.
Yes,
Don't
sir.
forget, it's not only governorship election in these two states, it's also a central election in Kogi West.
So
That's
stick
it for
with us.
tonight.
That's it. Thanks a lot for joining us. Ijoma Onyato.
I'm Sean Kimale. Good night.